I remember babysitting once and I came down and he had his face covered in green and there was clearly green candy on the table. And it was like, so Craig, what happened? And without missing a beat, he went into, well, there was a green monster who jumped in my mouth and ran down my throat, and that is why the candy is gone. And I think right then I was like, you know what? I like working with young children.
This is High Tech High Unboxed. I'm Alec Patton, and in this episode, my friend and colleague Sarah Fine is interviewing her kindergarten teacher, Kemp because, well, kindergarten made a big impression on Sarah. Sarah doesn't say much about herself in the episode, so I'll introduce her here. Sarah is the director of the San Diego Teacher Residency, which is part of the High Tech High Graduate School of Education. She's the co-author with Jal Mehta of In Search of Deeper Learning, The Quest to Remake the American High School, and she's been on the podcast before in Season 2, Episode 14, What Can School Learn from After School? Now here's Sarah's interview with her kindergarten teacher, Kemp.
What year was it that you were in my class?
I was born in 83, so it would have been probably 88, 89.
Okay, wow, okay.
Do you want to just start by introducing yourself, like sort of who you are now,
Sure.
and then we can go back to that moment at some point?
Okay, my name is Kemp Harris, and right now I am 68 years old, but I started teaching when I graduated, and I started teaching in 1974. And I continued to teach full-time kindergarten, first grade, until I retired, or I thought I was going to retire in 2012, but the principal where I was said, don't retire because we don't want you to go. So I ended up hanging around as an ISS aide for about 7 more years, and so I retired a couple of years back. But yeah, I taught all that time, and this is what brought me to Sarah, because Sarah was in my kindergarten class, and I remember your mom and your dad coming for conferences, and it was just
Oh my
so
gosh.
fun talking with them. Yeah, and your mom was just awesome, and so I can see how you went into education and doing what you're doing because they laid quite a groundwork of just, hey, we're parents here for you to be doing the best that you can actually be, and we'll make sure we support you. And they were just those awesome parents who would just show up and be awesome all the time.
Well, I will say that I look back now and I totally won the lottery. I mean, my goodness. I mean, now right? So knowing I'm an educator too now, obviously, and now I work with novice educators who are just beginning their careers. And I think about what it means to have been in your class in kindergarten. And gosh, I mean, I remember a lot actually, and I don't remember that much about the rest of Bowen School. So, I don't know what that says, but and I have my own children, one of whom is about to start kinder, one of whom is in almost third grade. So I feel like my kindergarten awareness is supercharged right now, and so I've been thinking about you a lot.
Wow, okay.
I want to know, Sarah, because we haven't really talked about this, maybe even like shut your eyes if it helps you go back to it, but go back to 5-year-old Sarah Fine going to Mr. Harris's class. What do you remember? What were your first impressions?
So one thing I remember, and Kemp, you might remember this too, is my sister was just about to be born. So the very beginning of kindergarten, I think on the first or second day of that giant transition in my life, my aunt came to our house because my mom was in the hospital in labor, and she brought me to kindergarten. And Kemp, I don't know if you remember this, but you looked at her. We walked into the classroom and you said, "I know what this means." And I what I remember is I already felt so safe in that space. And I was probably on day 3 or 4 of my first time at a formal
Yeah.
public school. But you already knew us well enough to know exactly what was going on in our family and exactly why. I don't even know if you'd ever met my aunt before, but it was like you were part of our family and you knew, and so I just remember that sense of safety.
Wow.
And I think I remember, I don't know, maybe we raised chicks. I remember plants on the windowsills. I remember a lot of playing.
Yeah, we did chicks. We did the plants and the ones. So I don't know if we were doing. I think second grade did the butterflies. But yeah, we were raising chicks. I hated that unit because I was like so afraid that I was gonna, the chicks wouldn't hatch, and I was gonna have to go out and buy baby chicks and pretend we'd hatch them. But yeah, that was all of that stuff going on there. But yeah, I remember that because we had gotten together with your mom and dad to come in like for a visit in the summer when they have the kids play date. They come in and visit the class and. So I remember that yeah you're about to become a big sister. Yeah.
I think what's striking about that for me, though, is now that I have my own kids and I think about what a cataclysmic event it is for a child, especially a 5.5-year-old who's sort of fully conscious, to have a sibling come into their life.
Yeah.
And also what a cataclysmic event it is to go to kindergarten in the first place. So those two things happening together, and yet I felt so safe in that space. And I don't know how you did it, but
That
it
is
was.
awesome. I'm so happy to hear that.
And then I also just remember going back and seeing you all the way through. I used to call you Mister.
Yes, I remember you would come, you go like, Mister, and it'd be like, it's Sarah Fine coming in to visit.
Yeah. How did you come to teaching? Like, what's the story of how you landed in teaching and then at Bowen School in Newton, Massachusetts, of all places? I'm so curious about that.
I think my upbringing was such that I lived with my mom. She was a single mom, and we lived in Roxbury, Mass. But she wanted me to have better schooling, so I lived out in Framingham, and I was living with my aunts and uncles out there. And I think there was a part of me that understood that, yeah, my mom wanted me to be in better schools. I'm like, I'll take a worse school if I can hang out with you and be there. But I think that because of that upbringing, of always feeling that I was there for a good reason, but still longing to be somewhere else, I I sort of learned very early how to sort of begin to take on things and make them your own. Because I was in other people's spaces when I was growing up, and so I had to figure out some really good ways to fortify myself. And I think because of that upbringing, for a very long time, whenever someone said, "What are you going to be?" I would tell them, "I'm going to be a social worker." I mean, I don't know how you're in seventh grade and you've decided, "I'm going to be a social worker." But what happened was I met this family through this gospel chorus that I was in, and this man was a principal in Newton. He was Sam Turner was a principal at the Oak Hill School, and his wife was the pianist for the choir that we were in. But they had two kids, no, three kids, and so I sort of almost became like a foster kid, and I would do a lot of babysitting, and their kids were hysterically funny. And particularly their 2 year old at the time, whose name was Craig, they called him Mr. Goobers. And he was probably one of the most engaging and funny kids I'd ever met. I remember babysitting once and I came down and he had his face covered in green, and there was clearly green candy on the table. And it was like, so Craig, what happened? And without missing a beat, he went into, well, there was a green monster who jumped in my mouth and ran down my throat, and that is why the candy is gone. And I think right then I was like, you know what? I like working with young children. And I started doing volunteer work at Oak Hill School. I was a junior in high school. And that's when I began making that shift up. I think I'm going to be a teacher. And when I graduated high school, I went to Boston University and I did early childhood. And it was a lot of influence of that family. I met a lot of Newton teachers in those days. At that time, and this was like in 1969, 71, 72, Newton had a bunch of male kindergarten teachers, first grade teachers.
Hmm.
So my vision of what men do in education was really formed by that. And then later, it was sort of like you didn't see as many men in early education. But my startup was like, well, of course I can do that. Look at, I've got like four role models in one building.
Do you have any idea why that was? Why there were so many guys?
Wow, I know that when I was in college, it was a whole other time. I remember there was a book that I read called Push Back the Desks. And it seemed that At that time, there was a lot of very experimental education practices going on in terms of we're just going to not do it the old way. And so we don't want to use desks. And we're going to be exploring all these other aspects of what kids bring to classrooms. And there was a lot of emphasis of that. I think it was probably a holdover from old hippie times. I'm not sure. But there was this real sense of throwing out the old and just sort of giving people a chance to experiment. And so when I came to teaching, I certainly had the methodology that I'd gotten, at BU. But I will say that a lot of my emphasis, especially when I first started teaching those first few years, I was very much into, I just wanted to set an environment where kids were really comfortable and really felt empowered and just really knew they were appreciated and loved. And of course, we have to do all of the nitty gritty of curriculum, and I got that. But I was really into I want to make a space for kids, and I want kids to have a space to express themselves and do all of that. And we'll get to the academics. I promise. Yes, I swear to God, we will. But I was, I wanted that classroom to be vibrant, and I was sharing music and theater and all. It was just, yeah, it was a time. There are all these young parents who are like, absolutely, go right ahead, have a great time, we love it, and so yeah, it was a cool wild west of hanging out with kids and teaching. So it was awesome.
I'd love you to paint a picture of that if you can. Like, do you have any vivid memories of like a project or a theater production or something that went down in your classroom back then that kind of exemplifies that way of teaching?
Yeah, well, it's like I remember we would do this thing of where we would pick a letter of the week, and then you would like base your entire week's curriculum around, this letter sound. And so it was like you were taking all, your phonics, but you were doing that with like some music and with some theater and with cooking and with dance. And so in a way, it was sort of like Newton gave us the freedom to sort of say, this is the destination that we want to get to, and how you get there, we're going to leave that up to you. And so people were able to really hone in on what their strengths were and allowed to run with that. I mean, we did like big theater productions. I remember doing Wizard of Oz, and you had a lot of trees, a lot of those trees throwing apples, because if you got two classes together with like 50 kids, but we'd have like some kids backstage. They were like the backstage theater managers, and that meant that we'd have to read, script, and we'd have to do that. So it was a time when you were sort of allowed to, as long as you can get to the destination, we're not going to dictate for you how to do that. And I definitely remember the change when we began to get curriculum that was really system wide, because it was practically every school, depending on where it was and who the teachers were, there was a feeling that was very, very different. And I remember when we went to more system wide curriculum, and there would be like a math program that was for the system. I remember developmental math processes, DMP, and when that came in. And I distinctly remember one teacher saying, DMP, that stands for damn math program, and I'm not teaching it. And it was like, you're just what refusing to teach what they're suggesting. It really was a shift in terms of the way people approach their jobs, and that we had been from this get there the best way for you to this is where we want to be, and this is how we get there, and you need to fit this mold a lot more now. And I remember they wanted to have, and it was very interesting because they wanted to have programs for gifted children. And so then you get into that real bind of, okay, so now my child is gifted, which means so my child's going to get all of this extra stuff. It's like, that's like saying if your child's not gifted, then you don't get, the cool stuff. So we really got to that sense of wanting to get rid of the gifted program as much as just meeting kids where they were and letting them go as far as they could. I remember sitting in first grade and reading the Tolkien trilogies with one first grader, and he was totally into it. And so I'd have to read just to keep up, with where he was, because I wanted to give that child a space to sort of say, okay, I get it. You're way out of, on another end here, so I'm going to meet you there. But there were other things that I could do for other children. I knew that some kids, music was their thing, and I could reach some kids through printing out lyrics of a song. Like I remember I used to love the Coasters. There's a band in the '50s, and they had these crazy songs like "Yakety Yak, Don't Talk Back, Take out the paper and the trash, or you won't get no spending cash." And so you'd type these out, and I have kids color like trash and cash because they rhyme. So, but it was again, it was like you could make it up almost as you went, knowing that you had certain things that you needed to accomplish and things that you had to cover. And then, we really began to see here's the I remember when it's like here's the unit. This is the social studies unit. And it goes like this, and at the end we'll all have that. So I definitely see that there are very good points, particularly into reeling in people like me who love the wild, wild west. But at the same time, I appreciate it knowing that, okay, you're giving me a very clear look at where I need to be heading and where I want to end up. But I still appreciate that leeway. But it did give it sort of some conformity to what was happening because the other side of that wild, wild west was that there might be someone who spent most of their time doing something that they just loved because they loved it. But it's like, but it's not helping every kid.
Hmm. Well, so you mentioned Newton, and I would say, Kemp, this is where I'm most curious, and I feel like we probably haven't talked as much in the past. But like, I think probably for folks who listen to the podcast later, I should paint a little picture, which is, so Newton's a suburb of Boston, very affluent, very highly educated, very white and Asian, heavily Jewish, very, and I can maybe say this as a former Newtonite, like very competitive, a lot of focus on achievement and college and, credentials and doctors and lawyers and dentists and professors. And, and so I'm just immensely curious what it was like for you as a male elementary teacher, a Black elementary teacher, an openly gay elementary teacher in Newton, of all places.
Yeah.
Like, tell me about that. And you stayed. I think also I'm just really curious
Yeah.
how you managed to stay and sustain yourself and love the work
Yeah.
you did.
Yeah, I'll tell you, when I graduated, one, to have a man who was in early education, people were really clamoring for that. And so I was hired right away. And it was certainly there's a lot of influence by this family that I lived with because Sam Turner was a principal there. But I was so welcomed into that city. And I came at a time when you would be in a school for 2 years and then there'd be declining enrollment. So you would be moved to another building. So I went from the Hyde School to the Cabot School to the Underwood School. And then I landed at Bowen where I spent like 28 years. But my whole time in Newton, and I know that I'm sure there are people who experienced racism. I'm sure there are folks who experience homophobia in Newton. It's not like if you're in Newton, you're going to be shielded from everything. But as an employee and as an educator working in Newton, I found that parents were so enamored to have their children experience the diversity of one a man, one a Black man. And then when I became really comfortable being out and gay, I just had a sense of real acceptance is not the word because I think to be accepted, it sounds like it's a gift that someone gives you. It's like I don't have to be
Mhm.
accepted, but that sense that I was really appreciated for what I brought to that city, and so I never had those moments of regretting where I was. I think that when Newton got on there was an era when there was a lot of racial diversity training, and Newton really spent a lot of time doing that. And then, like all things, after you've done it for a while, you say, "Well, we've accomplished that goal, and we're done."
Check.
Yeah, check. We did
Yeah.
that. So there is a period in Newton where there is just a lot of racial awareness going on. And I was glad that I was in a system that was sort of taking that on. So my experience in Newton, I mean, I remember being in school, and I remember and this is like back in the '80s. I probably told you this, but on Christopher Columbus Day, which is now Indigenous People Day. Back then, back in the '70s and '80s, I'd be like, well, It's going to be Christopher Columbus Day, and we're not going to have school as a holiday, but there are some people who are not going to celebrate this because it's not a happy time for them. It would be like you inviting a friend to your house and they discover your toys and take them. And at that point, kids would be like, ah! But I was always waiting, like when they went home and went, you know what? Mr. Harris said that kids, some people don't like Christopher Columbus Day. I never got that blowback. In fact, I'd have parents who would come in and go, yeah, my son told me about that coming to take your toys thing. I think that really let him know what it was like to have Chris Columbus come over and take your land. So I was very supported, very supported. I do remember there was one time, there was one family that had an issue with my gayness, and the cool thing was my principal was basically said to them, "I'm sorry that you have that issue, but it's your issue." So I was supported all the way through. So yeah, my time in Newton was good.
Yeah. I love hearing that. And I'm also, there's so much conversation right now about teacher retention and like, how do we get them to stay given how intense of a job it is and often how unsupported of a job it is. And,
Mhm.
some people would say, oh, well, those scripted curriculums can help teachers stay more because it takes it, lightens the load of the planning. But then,
Mhm.
other people argue, well, but it's the creativity that draws the teachers in the first place. And I'm just curious, like, what did you do to sustain yourself, regardless of Newton or not? Like, there's not that many teachers who stay for 40 years. So,
I know.
like, what were some of the practices that I mean, I know you had your music. I'd love to hear about that. And
Yeah,
also, like, who did you connect with? How did you keep yourself from getting burned out?
yeah.
Were there moments where you thought about leaving? I mean,
Well, I think that for me, I always had a dual life going on. I think that there are people who get into their teaching and their teaching is the only focus that they have. And they're very, very good at it, but it really consumes everything that they do. And to the point that some folks that I knew would say, I can't wait for the summer to be over because it's like they live in the classroom. And for me, I mean, I always had dual things going on from the very beginning. I was doing theater, and I remember Newton had kindergarten. It was part time, so the other kids stayed until 3, but kindergarten was done at 11:30, and so we were like half-time teachers, or no, it was even 11:45, yeah, kids got out. And then I remember when they shifted and kids got out at 12:30, I was like, 45 extra minutes? I have things to do. I have to be at the theater. So I remember being in class, and so if they left at 11:45 and I had rehearsal at 1 o'clock, and it's winter time, so I'd be like, okay, I know it's going to take them 20 minutes to get their boots on. We'd start getting ready about like 11:35, so that way at exactly 11:45 they could go home and I could head to the theater. I was doing acting work, TV, commercial work, some films. So it was almost to the point that kids in my class thought that all teachers do Star Market commercials. Mine does, doesn't yours? And parents, if my room did not have a piano, I remember one year parents went out and got me an old upright piano that they brought in because they knew that was important for me. So for me, it was one of those things of I was teaching because I loved teaching, and it was my livelihood. That was where I made my, money to sustain myself. But I could also do theater, and I could be in bands, and I could do all that, and I didn't have to rely on that as my livelihood, which meant that I could do this job that I loved as a teacher, make my livelihood, and then that freed me to do theater and music and band work and all of that without depending on it for money, so that I didn't feel I was one of those actors who was scrounging for every single job. I would do a job or do a theater piece because I wanted to do one. And I remember doing hair, and some parents brought their kids to see me in hair at the Turtle Lane Theater, and hair had a lot of swearing in it. And I come out and I'm about to do the thing, and I look first row, and there's like some parents and their kids. I was like, oh, wow. So I came in the next day and I was like, okay, last night when you saw me saying a lot of those words that were inappropriate, that's called theater and it's called acting. And we don't use those words in our real life, But it was that sense of that sustained me a lot. And I mean, there's a real community of teachers going on there. I don't know if you remember Mr. Silverman from Bowen School, but we had a volleyball league. We would get together on, certain days and we would do, I think Tuesdays and Thursdays were short days or something. We had like a floor hockey league. We'd get together with teachers from all of the elementary schools. So there was a real sense of camaraderie going on. And yeah, just a bunch of young teachers figuring this all out and sort of in it together. And so that's where I got a lot of strength from. I just had other outlets that really gave me space to exercise everything that I wanted to do and still do this job of teaching that I loved. It didn't get in my way, and my music didn't get in its way. In fact, I think I combined a lot of it, a lot of the theater, and that I did. I mean, if you're a teacher, you're pretty much on, and if you have an improvisational, thing to you, it means you can just walk into a classroom and you can talk with kids, and nothing that they do can throw you because you're just ready to go. And so I used my theater, I used my music in my classroom. So I sort of was able to meld the two in a very interesting way. I think had I been a fifth grade math teacher, it would have been a very different scenario. But I chose the place that I liked, and I liked working with 5 and 6 year old kids. Yeah.
Alec, I don't know if you're feeling the same way, but Kemp, listening to you, it almost sounds like you're describing a different era or a different planet. Like I'm thinking about, and in a beautiful way, right? Like the being able to sustain yourself in the afternoons and the weekends and the summers, through this other set of passions and talents you had, and then bring those into classroom. I just think about the teachers I work with now, and they're in their classrooms from 7 a.m. till 5 p.m. and their summer ends at the beginning of August, and there's 3 or 4 weeks of staff development and learning. And I'm really torn. I'm curious what you'd say, because I feel like on the one hand, there's a recognition of how complex, like both intellectually and academically and social emotionally teaching is, and how much planning often goes into the best teaching.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
there's this like, well, we do need to have conversations as a staff about these things, and we do need time to plan collaboratively, and we do need to be meeting with parents regularly, and all of this. And then there's another part of me that thinks if all of our teachers had a little bit more buffer around their days and their years to do things that they love, that they can then bring into their teaching and their projects, like we might all benefit, including, mainly the
Yeah.
students, and our teachers might be staying longer and they might not be burning out so quickly. So
Mhm.
I don't know what to make of that, really.
Yeah. I mean, I in the last 7 years, or after I retired full time, and I stayed at the Angel School, and I was there for 7 years and subbing and doing whatever else was necessary. I mean, I really looked at how the job had changed. I mean, technology changed a lot of things, and technology had been coming and building it all the time anyway. So you can't stop time. You can't stop progress from moving on. But I, sort of began to look at the teaching job that teachers had, and again, as you said, so much of it was in the planning of what you're going to do, and the gathering of what you're going to do in terms of your tech and the presentation, and you need to have your entire schedule written on the whiteboard, because that way, if anyone walked into the classroom, they should be able to look at that whiteboard and know where you are at that moment, and to know what your kids are going to learn that day. And I found that so stifling, because when I was teaching, it was sort of like something would happen that might turn your entire focus of what you were teaching to a different area, and you were allowed to just go there. And so the thought that I need to have my entire day listed in such a way that a stranger could walk in and they should be able to look at that schedule and say, yes, that's where you want to be now. And the other one that I love was that anyone should be able to walk in and say to a child in your classroom, so what are you doing right now? And that child should be able to, between the board and everything, should be able to tell them very succinctly that we're doing this, this, this. I'm like, I'm not sure that I want a 6 year old to be able to do that. I really don't know if I'm comfortable with that. I would hope that your answer would be, what do you mean? Well, are you? Oh, you mean? Well, I'm gonna do read this book, but yeah, we were just playing. And then we did and then we did a song. I mean, I want them to have a sense of there was some leeway and buffer in their lives that they could be kids. So I get the situation that because of where we are, our planning and what's necessary and our coordination with other people and how we put this all together is very necessary. But there's also a part of me that kids do so much independently these days between their devices and their things that they learn on that it's like I'd like to do some more communal working on some other kinds of things because you're probably if they I sometimes thought that if kids could swipe left that it'd make me go away from teaching in front of them when I was subbing in fourth fifth grade. It's like, dude, I'm just gonna swipe left and you'll leave me alone. I can go back to my device and finish doing what I'm doing. So I absolutely understand it. It's just it would be hard for someone like me and where I came from in my upbringing of education to be a teacher today. I mean, I could probably pull it off, but it'd be a hard slug for me.
Hmm. What would be your advice to young teachers now, right? Like, this is what I do with
Gonna
my
put me on
life
the
now.
spot. Oh my God. I
Well,
don't know about young teachers now. I'd be telling them something that's not going to help them. They'd be like, Sarah, oh yeah, your kindergarten teacher told me this and it totally doesn't work. He was like, hang loose, be free. Yeah, keep going. Go ahead. I'll try to think of an answer. Okay.
no, I wouldn't feel too pressured. I'm just curious more about that, like how in this environment that it sounds like you do know a bit, you've lived through some changes and you know kind of the ways things feel now. For a young teacher who has the creativity, who has the inspiration, who loves the children, and is hoping to stay in the field for a long time, and
Mhm.
that's one of the things we look for in the teachers we bring into my program is folks who aren't just like, oh, well, I'll teach for a couple of years, then I'll go into policy. We hear that a lot. It's
Oh,
like,
wow. Yeah.
but if they're planning to stay and they do have the instinct to be more improvisational and creative, and also, their training is going to teach them how to manage some of the demands that schools and communities make now. Like what wisdom might you have to share to them? Or
Um,
what might you want to tell your young teacher self if you could go back and like talk to him?
yeah. I would say that you should expect that in the first few years of your teaching, it is a real process of pulling all of that study and all of that practice and all of that together, and it's going to be hard. And that there is that time where you're just on the edge of your seat, making sure that you've got all of your curriculum covered and that you've used all the practices and you've done all these things. But that to know, and I know it sounds cliche, but it's that sense that it does get better. And I think that once teachers are comfortable with their field of whatever their grade level, what they're teaching, I think injecting yourself into what you do is so important. There's a friend of mine, his name is Doug Herbst, and he teaches out in Medway, and he did fourth grade when I was working at Bowen, and he was there. But this is a guy who, I mean, he's a soccer fanatic. He is a New York Yankees fan, but he knew his curriculum. He had that down, but he also shared with kids who he was. So every kid in his class knew Mr. Herbst is a Yankee fan. And if you go in and you start talking some smack about the Red Sox, it's not going to be cute because he's going to go, but they would do stuff they do like, baseball scores and the run batting average of blah, blah, blah. And just like, but it's bringing yourself to your job in such a way that the kids totally know who you are and respect you as their teacher, but they also know that not friend is not the word, but they know you really like them and they really like you because that's half of it right there. I think if you're not genuine with yourself and with your kids, they can sense that. And that's why I say with young teachers like you need a good, I don't know how many years I'm going to say, but you need that gelling period. And then when it does work, it's just awesome. I remember my first year of teaching, I was going to be everybody's friend, and I came in and I think I gave my phone number. And it was like, so, if anybody wants to call me or say anything, and I remember being at home with my husband now, my partner Bill, and the phone rings, and he's like, hello, and it was this voice like, eh, eh, is Mr. Harris there? And I was like, who? He said, I don't know, it's a kid. And I was like, after that year, it's like, okay, you do not give your phone number. You don't want to be there, everybody's pal. So I was just like, I'm your best friend. Call me up and I will come to every birthday party. And I will, then it's like, okay, you don't need to do all that. They will love you, But yeah, but you need time to just figure out the art of teaching and then put yourself in it. And it takes a little while, but when it gels up, it's awesome.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kemp, for taking the time.
It's amazing to see you.
Welcome.
Hopefully see
All
you
righty.
soon. Okay.
Good seeing you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Alec.
My pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.
High Tech High Unboxed is hosted and edited by me, Alec Patton. Our theme music is by Brother Herschel. A huge thank you to Sarah Fine and Kemp Harris for this week's episode. Now, I need to tell you, in addition to teaching and acting, Kemp has released some fantastic albums. His latest is Live at the Bird SF. We put a link to it in the show notes. Thanks for listening.